If you could just time travel back to, say, 1910 and take a walk down Fifth Avenue or Riverside Drive, you wouldn't see what's there today. You'd be staring up at a skyline of actual stone palaces. I mean, private homes on a scale that's, well, it's pretty much impossible to imagine today. But if you go to those same spots now, all you'll find are apartment buildings. These Gilded Age mansions were some of the most over-the-top, extravagant places ever built in America, and then, poof, they just vanished.
So that's the big question, right? How did this happen? We're not talking about one or two houses. This was like a tidal wave of demolition that took out dozens of these architectural marvels, a lot of them just a few decades after they were built. Okay, so let's get into this. It's an incredible story of ambition, of crazy excess, and of the constant, relentless churn of New York City.
I want you to just picture this scene for a second. It's 1948. A wrecking ball is just hanging there, right in front of this magnificent French chateau. This isn't in the French countryside. It's on Riverside Drive in Manhattan. And it's not just any house. It's the 75-room Schwab Mansion, the largest private home New York has ever known. This one single image pretty much captures the final crashing end of an entire era. But to really get how we got to this point, we've got to go back a bit, back to the Gilded Age itself, when these houses were a whole lot more than just a place to live. That's right, you heard it. These mansions, they were weapons. They were basically giant declarations made of stone and marble, built not for comfort, but for combat. Combat in a really fierce social war that was raging in late 19th century New York. So after the Civil War, America just exploded with industrial wealth. We're talking railroads, steel, banking. People were getting rich like crazy rich, faster than anyone had ever seen before. And this created a whole new class of millionaires, guys who saw themselves as these rugged, self-made titans. And, if you think you've built an entire empire from scratch, you're going to want a castle to prove it.
But here was the problem. The old guard, the families in New York with all the inherited wealth, they wanted absolutely nothing to do with this new money. The ultimate gatekeeper was a woman named Caroline Astor, and her social advisor, Ward McAllister, literally made a list of the only people who mattered. It was called the 400, and the reason it was 400 was because that's how many people could fit into Mrs. Astor's ballroom. Seriously, if you weren't on that list, you were out.
And this just lays out the whole conflict perfectly. On one side, you had the knobs, that's the old money. They liked their quiet, traditional, elegant homes. But the swells, the newly rich guys, they had a totally different playbook. They couldn't use their family name to get in the door, so they used what one historian called architectural overwhelming. Basically, they built palaces so enormous, so ridiculously opulent, that high society literally could not ignore them anymore.
So let's look at two of the most absolutely extreme examples of this strategy. We're talking about the mansions of William A. Clark and Charles M. Schwab. Two super ambitious outsiders who tried to buy their way to the top of the social ladder using stone, marble, and a whole lot of cash.
First up is the Copper King from Montana, William Clark. His place on Fifth Avenue had 121 rooms. It was so completely over the top that everyone just called it Clark's Folly. It took 14 years to build, it had 4 art galleries, and, get this, its own private underground railroad just to bring in coal. And the punchline? Critics hated it, the public thought it was hideous, and the second he died in 1925, his own family packed their bags and got out of there.
And then you have Charles Schwab, the head of U.S. Steel. He built his 75-room palace over on Riverside Drive, which at the time was considered the wrong side of the park, but he didn't care. The place had its own power plant, a massive swimming pool, a gym. His one and only instruction to his architect was to build something that would make Andrew Carnegie's mansion look like a starter home.
And you know what? He succeeded. I mean, listen to this. When the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest men on the planet, visited Schwab's new house for the first time, he just looked around and grumbled, "Now my house looks like a shack." That one little sentence tells you everything you need to know about the insane scale of Schwab's ambition. Just look at them side by side. Clark's place had 121 rooms and stood for just 16 years. 16! Schwab's had 75 rooms, lasted a bit longer at 42 years. Both cost an absolute fortune for the time, and both ended up facing the wrecking ball. They were unbelievably spectacular, but their lifespans were just incredibly short. And to put that cost into perspective, Clark's $7 million mansion would be worth over $241 million today. Think about that for a second. For a single private home. It's a level of spending that is just almost impossible to wrap your head around. But here's the thing. These palaces, they didn't exist in a bubble. Just a few miles downtown, life was a completely different story. All that Gilded Age grandeur, all that glitter on Millionaires Row, it was all built on an economic system that didn't just create extreme wealth, but also extreme crushing poverty. And the contrast between these two worlds existing right on top of each other is really the key to understanding this entire era.
So while you have these families of maybe 4 people rattling around in 121-room palaces, the vast majority of New Yorkers, 2/3 of the whole city, were crammed into buildings called tenements. These places were notoriously dark, they had no air circulation, and a lot of them didn't even have the basics, like indoor toilets.
Yeah, the conditions were so awful that some places got these really grim nicknames. There was a spot on the Lower East Side everyone called the Lung Block. Why? Because tuberculosis, they called it the White Plague, was absolutely rampant. It's a disease that just thrived in those overcrowded, unsanitary buildings.
This chart, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? On one side, you've got maybe 4 people living in a 121-room mansion. On the other, you have 10 people crammed into 300 square feet. It was a city of 2 completely different, separate realities. And a city like that just couldn't last forever.
And it didn't. In the first half of the 20th century, all these powerful new forces, economic, social, practical, they just started to completely remake Manhattan. And this led to the demolition of both the Gilded Age palaces and the city's poorest slums. All of it driven by this new, modern vision for what a city should be. So check out how this all plays out on this timeline. 1927, Clark's Folly, already kind of a useless dinosaur, gets torn down. 1929, the stock market crashes, wiping out fortunes like Schwab's. By 33, even getting a free palace is bad politics. And then, just a year later, the lung block gets raised too. Do you see how these things are happening at the same time? The city was clearing land, rich and poor alike, to build a new, denser future. And finally, in 48, Schwab's Mansion falls to that exact same force, a city in a state of rapid, ruthless change.
And the fate of the Schwab Mansion? It was really sealed in this one moment. Charles Schwab, totally broke after the Depression, offers his palace to the city to be used as the official mayor's residence. So Mayor Furiello LaGuardia, a real man of the people, he goes to tour the place and gives this legendary reply. What? Me and that? In the middle of the Great Depression, the idea of the mayor living there was just impossible. The city said, thanks, but no thanks.
And at the very same time, this idea of slum clearance was really taking hold. So here's the playbook. First, reformers and developers would label neighborhoods like the Lung Block as diseased sores on the city. Then they'd demolish them, kicking out thousands of residents, only to build these brand new apartment complexes that were totally and completely unaffordable for the people who used to live there.
So, after all that demolition, all that destruction, what's actually left? What does a city choose to remember and what does it just decide to erase? Well, the legacies of these two vanished worlds, the palaces and the tenements, they're still kind of visible today if you know where to look.
Okay, so if you go to the exact spot where William Clark's hated 121-room mansion once stood, you'll now find 960 Fifth Avenue. It's this super elegant, famously exclusive co-op building. The single-family palace was replaced by what someone at the time called 12 mansions built one on top of another. It was a more practical but still very, very exclusive kind of luxury.
And what about Charles Schwab's palace, the biggest private house ever built in New York City? Today, that entire block is taken up by this big, practical, red brick apartment building. But, in an irony that is just so perfect it's almost hard to believe, its name is Schwab House. His name is forever attached to the very kind of middle-class housing he spent a fortune trying to rise above.
In the end, all these ghost palaces kind of leave us with a question. The guys who built them, they wanted to create something permanent, a legacy in stone that would shout to the world how important they were forever. But in a city like New York, stone is never permanent, so it makes you wonder, what actually remains when the stone is gone? Is it the memory, the stories, or is it just the empty space on a map where something absolutely monumental used to be?